Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is November 18th. It's Wednesday night. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you live from Washington, D.C., headquarters of American Free Press, the national weekly newspaper published right here on Capitol Hill. Of course, you know the website of American Free Press is AmericanFreePress.net. And if you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do that. American Free Press is a good newspaper, provides a lot of differing opinions, but all basically on the same page. Now, tonight, all things being equal, we are going to be joined very shortly by a new columnist for American Free Press. I think he has had 2 or 3 columns published in the paper during the last several weeks. Can't remember how many there have been, frankly. But I do know that they're good stuff. The column he's got in this week's issue of American Free Press, which I saw visiting down there at the American Free Press office this afternoon, was good stuff. Now, of course, I am referring to former Congressman Jim Trafficant. He was a Democrat from Ohio, but I tell you what, he was more of an independent in many ways than he ever was committed to any particular political party. And in his interview with American Free Press, the only full-fledged press interview with print media that he gave to our correspondent and circulation manager, Pete Papaheracles, Jim Traficant made what I thought was a very, very interesting point, that he is someone who is identified more so than any other political figure with the concept of being for America first. And I think that's absolutely correct. That's not meant as a slight to Ron Paul or any of the other people out there who have been engaged in political endeavors here in the United States over the past 10 or 20 years or so. Now, they're trying to reach Jim right now, and I expect he'll be with us very, very shortly. I'm sorry? Okay, great, yeah. So, as I say, I thought that was a very interesting comment from Mr. Trafficant that he is identified with the theme of America first. And, you know, that goes in a lot of different directions. Now, I do want to preface something by saying it's kind of funny. I just read on the Internet the other day that Jim Traficant and I have been engaged in a conspiracy. I have been, according to this one rather strange website writer, blogger, whatever you want to call it, I have been engaged in issuing press releases for Traficant and raising money for him and doing all sorts of things, perfectly legal, but evidently there seemed to be some terrible objection to this fact. Well, you know, the funny thing is, it would be very, very difficult for Jim Traficant and I to have conspired, because the last time I talked to him was in 2002 when he was sitting in a jail in Akron, Ohio, calling me collect in Washington, D.C., right before he was being shipped off to the federal gulag at Allenwood, Pennsylvania. So for Trafficant and I to have conspired to do anything in the last several weeks, let alone the last several years, would be quite difficult, especially considering the fact that at least one letter that I wrote to Trafficant while he was in jail never reached him. But I am pleased to say that he is with us now, and I welcome Jim Traficant aboard. Jim, do you want to conspire?
Yeah, we're conspiring, I guess. I guess we're communicating.
You know what, Jim? We're conspiring right into the first commercial.
That's all right. I'll wait for you.
Back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper here. Great pleasure to have our very, very special guest on here tonight, former Congressman Jim Traficant. Jim, welcome aboard.
Well, glad to be with you. I'm glad to be anywhere, though, Michael.
Well, Jim,
I'm surprised they haven't put you in prison yet. I mean it. Watch yourself.
Well, let's put it this way. Bad things happen to good people.
Well, you watch yourself.
Well, Jim,
I've gone through some hell here.
You spent 7 years. You spent 7 years in the can, and to the best of my research, and I happen to be a bit of a researcher, it looks to me as though you served more time in prison than any member of Congress who ever went to prison thus far.
There's no doubt about it. You know what? When you're the number one target of the Justice Department since 1983, the number one target of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee starting in 1990, I think that it's quite evident you're probably going to do more time than anybody else. They really did what they had to do to put me in prison. They couldn't beat me with a gun as far as they tried every year, and they tried to indict me 4 or 5 times over a 20-year span. But, Michael, I'll tell you what, I'm better for it. And there's a statement that was made by Nelson Mandela that if you really want to know the true nature of a nation, to see the real underbelly of a nation, you got to go through the prison.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have.
Yeah, it's funny. I've known a lot of people who've been locked up over the years. Some people did what they were locked up for. Some people didn't do what they were locked up for, like you. But, that's the one thing that I've consistently heard from people who have been there and done that, so to speak. And, I said from the beginning, as you well know, I said these people were railroading Trafficant. A lot of people, generally think that, well, if a guy's a member of Congress, he must be a crook, but maybe he's our crook. But you consistently refused to accept a pardon or ask for clemency because you said you wouldn't admit to things that you didn't do. And a lot of people would have been ready to do that.
Well, I wouldn't do that on my life. And I'll tell you something, Michael, they'll pay before it's over, 5 of the 9 people have now admitted that they were pressured to lie. And there's a young man in Nigeria whose life was ruined because he said he wouldn't perjure himself for the government against trafficking. That's the Okolo young man from Baltimore. And I'm surprised no one's looked into his case. He's a black man that came over here. His parents came over here from Nigeria, and he had an auto leasing company in Northern Virginia. And I had someone lease me a car and hold it with their credit card. And the government went to him and wanted him to say there were kickbacks involved. And he told me, and I ran into this guy at Ellenwood prison up there in Pennsylvania. He said, if it was just you, he says, I'll tell you the truth. He said, I'd have lied right through my teeth and wouldn't have gone through all this, he said. But I had to implicate the other guy that brought the credit card to hold the car. And he said he had 2 small kids like me, and I just couldn't do it. Well, bottom line, Michael, is they eventually sent him to prison, put him on diesel therapy when they realized he talked with me. He's 11 months on a bus, honest to God. Then they tried to get him on bank fraud. Then they deport him. So he submits this affidavit to the Nigerian government that his life was ruined because he wouldn't perjure himself and commit a crime for the Justice Department. His attorney calls him and tells him that if he don't submit another affidavit saying he's just distraught and upset, that they're going to deport his 79-year-old parents. He finally had enough. He said, go to hell. Well, the bottom line, Michael, the INS start deportation orders on his 79-year-old parents who were in the country for over 40 years. And last I heard, the Catholic Charities of Baltimore is looking into it. And I feel so bad for this young man. And I was hoping maybe that AFP and Michael Collins Piper would do a real investigative article on this man, because this black man, this was a shame what they did to him and wrecked his life. He went bankrupt, lost everything, and his kids are here in the country, his wife, and he's just been disenfranchised, and now his parents are going through that, all because of the government's zeal.
Well,
hurt me.
As I see it from everything I have read, and my God, this is a guy in Baltimore, Maryland, but the FBI and the Justice Department terrorized the entire Mahoning Valley in their campaign to get you. I mean, they were hauling in your cousins and your uncles and your neighbors and your people you didn't even know, trying to get anything they could on you.
Well, you know what, Michael? The bottom line is that everyone who testified against me was subject to going to prison. Mm-hmm. They had no evidence at all. And now, you've been around, and you're probably as astute as political investigator, journalist that exists in this country. And I say that as a compliment to you.
I appreciate that.
That is the truth, my man. And I think if your politics weren't looked down upon by the institutional powers that be, you'd get that type of respect and credit that you deserve. But just let me say this. All of those people, after all that, the government stated at trial, 200 agents, $15 million, 6 years, and they offered that they made no audio or videotapes on me. Never bugged my phone. Now, Mike Robertson, a retired Secret Service agent, come right out and said they railroaded this guy. He said because Secret Service wouldn't even indict Trafficant. He says whenever you have no physical evidence at all, he says you've got to get some sort of admission from the target themselves. He said, and this is what he said, when I read in the newspaper that the government stated they made no tapes on this man, send nobody to it with him with a body mic, no videotapes, he says, I knew why. It's very simple. Trafficant is not guilty, and he said Trafficant could have subpoenaed all of those tapes, he says, because I guarantee you, he said they had boxes of them, and he says they could all have been exculpatory for Trafficant. It says, where's the crime?
So they had nothing to introduce.
Yeah, you've been around a long time. How can you believe 6-year investigation? And the jury was basically gerrymandered. They were scared to death. They were afraid to talk several of the people after it. They dismissed one juror the day before he had a death in the family, and they didn't give him 2-3 hours to go to the funeral. They got rid of him because they knew they get given these notebooks, and they're supposed to keep their notes in them, and they were not to take them out of the courtroom. And several jurors said that it was evident they were going through their notes. It is a hell of a mess. They passed a special rule in Ohio. No one from my congressional district was eligible to serve on the jury. But you know, all about this time, Michael, that they were doing this with over 200 agents, our country was attacked. The Twin Towers and the Pentagon were attacked. And they were more interested in Jim Traficant, evidently, than our national security. And I think there's some real questions about these attacks. And, you know, the main thing that bothered me very much, though, is they move very fast. And I started to get information. People trusted me because I had beaten, the only American ever to beat the Justice Department in a RICO trial, pro se, without being attorney in '83. And I was targeted ever since. But people trusted me, and they gave me information. And I started getting a hell of a lot of information about what 911 was about and who was involved with it. Next thing you know, bang, they come down on me like a ton of bricks. And I believe that I would have gotten information. I ended up getting information anyway over a period of years while I was in prison. And I got more information about that 911 activity than I have to this point even mentioned. But that 911 commission, like all commissions, is designed to, I believe, massage the issue, not solve it or investigate it.
You know, Jim, I've told the story on this program. I ran into you over at the Taverna, our favorite restaurant here, which unfortunately now it's closed. That's another story for another time.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I ran into you over there on like September 12th or September 13th, and I remember you telling me in the only way that you can how you got up on the floor of the House of Representatives and dared to suggest that the reason why we were attacked was because of our policy in the Middle East. And I remember you telling me that you looked around and saw all these members of Congress with their jaws hanging down to their knees.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember that so vividly because at that time, everybody was just kind of playing along with the official story. But, you know, this is the problem, and you pointed this out in your interview with American Free Press, that there have been so many major events. I mean, look, your case alone is a perfect example of how the government commits misdeeds, how they target people politically, how they do conspire to do bad things. And repeatedly throughout your career in Congress, you pointed this out, whether it was the FBI, the IRS, the BATF, whether it was Janet Reno and Bill Clinton and the Red Chinese Secret Service. It went on and on. And a lot of Americans still find it hard to believe, but you were there. You've seen it yourself.
Yeah, you know, what I said on the House floor was, in fact, the truth. I said 911 was the issue of the United States of America simply because of our one-sided policy in the Mideast, that we have now, I said, we've imported the violence, and people are giving us a taste for being so unobjective. Now, you know, I'm the number one target of Israel right now, and I will say this. There's no doubt in my mind what they were concerned about me. I had a bigger following than people would like to admit.
Mm-hmm.
I had a little funny style about me, but people knew that I didn't double speak. I didn't use all the fancy words. I basically told it like it was, and I tried to do it in a way to be entertaining enough so people might listen to me. Because Congress was never going to promote somebody like me. They didn't like my policies. But what I said was, and I say this till today, is you've got a powerful foreign entity that's controlling this government, and the American people are just sitting back and they're afraid to say anything. Congress is afraid to say anything. That's how powerful it is. So, I do a column now for the American Free Press. I've gotten a lot of bad publicity, to be quite honest about it, Michael.
Oh, absolutely.
They're saying, boy, he's really radical, he's with a radical organization. But I'm going to tell you something. The bottom line is this. I'm not afraid to say what's wrong with the country. I'm not against anybody. But listen, I wasn't elected to the Israeli Knesset or the Japanese Diet. I was elected to the United States Congress, and by God, I'm going to say what I think is a problem in the country. And listen, we're in wars we shouldn't be involved in. We're bankrupt over them for an expansionist policy of a foreign country. And when their prime minister, not their publicity man, but when their prime minister says, we control the American government, I think everybody should be listening.
Well, that's a hell of a way to go into the break. All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Do you know the truth about...
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Michael Collins Piper here at republicbroadcasting.org with our special guest, former Congressman Jim Trafficant. Jim, I want to remind you about something which you've probably totally forgotten, but it's quite relevant to what we were just talking about. Back in, I think I met you for the first time in person back in about late 1986 or early 1987. And the way that came about was very, very interesting because we had two brothers who were writing for the old newspaper, The Spotlight. Their names were Ken and Jim Collier, and they focused mainly on the issue of computerized vote fraud. But they wanted to make some extra money, and they came around the office one day, and they said, hey, Mike, what could we do to make some extra money doing other stories for The Spotlight? And I said, well, you could do some interviews. And they said, yeah, okay, who could we interview? And I said, well, I'll tell you what. There's this guy that just got elected to Congress a couple years ago named Jim Traficant. And I said, why don't you see if you can get an interview with Traficant? I said, I'll go along. I'd like to meet this guy, and I'll take the pictures. Well, Ken Collier and I came over, and we sat down with you. I think they call that the speaker's lobby out there. And we sat down there. We sat with you in your office for a while and took some pictures and talked, and then you had to go for a vote. And you came back, and we sat down and talked a little bit more. But, the funny thing, Jim, is that guy Jim Collier and Ken Collier, who wrote for The Spotlight, they were Jewish guys. So the next time somebody throws this anti-Semitic, Liberty Lobby, American Free Press thing at you, you can just tell them that the first reporter for American Free Press and its predecessor, The Spotlight, to interview you was a nice Jewish guy named Ken Collier. That's something you probably didn't know. You had no reason to know, but I'm telling you here on the air right now. So next time they shove the anti-Semitic stuff at you, you shove it back at them. Shove them back with the facts.
Well, Michael, I'm not an anti-Semite. I just tell it the way it is, and it happens to be the truth. But, I will say this to you, and I look back in retrospect. I became very dangerous to the Israeli lobby because I was probably featured on national TV interviews, and my speeches were starting to be picked up on different issues, and people had started to follow me, and they started to believe and listen to what I was saying. And I was saying that our country was in a vice, that we had a one-sided policy in the Mideast, and it was largely to do with our economic problems, not just our terrorist and military problems. And now, as we look here today, I've been taking a lot of flack for statements I made on the Greta Van Susteren show, and a couple people come after me, treating me like I'm a kook or whatever. But let me just tell you something. I said it earlier. We're involved in foreign wars we have little or no real major interest in. My God, the Capitol Police could overrun the Iraq. Second of all, it's an expansionist policy strictly for Israel. They control and powerfully manipulate our Congress. Where are we? We're now bankrupt. This nation is bankrupt, and I'll tell you something. One of the biggest fears, everyone listening to your show, and there should be a hell of a lot more people listening to you, believe me, buddy, but one of the greatest fears they should have is they'll wake up some morning and read the headlines, or they'll see that ticker on the television, and the dollar has collapsed completely. We're belly up in this country, Michael. Forget this 10% unemployment. It's about 20. Also, forget this coming out of a recession. Truth of the matter is, you take Medicare and Social Security dollars out of this economy, and it makes 1929 look like a fender bender. We're in a depression. We're in a serious problem, and they're dealing and tinkering with symptoms, Michael. The problem is the progressive income tax and that Federal Reserve System. We don't even coin our own money, control our own money. And second of all, we reward dependency, subsidize illegitimacy with a communist progressive income tax. Now, it's very simple, Michael. Until they move to a consumption tax, and I recommend it to be a final retail sales of 25%, which includes total funding for Medicare and Social Security, there's no more withholding, no more debt taxes, no more capital gains tax, no more IRS. You repeal the 16th Amendment. And one thing is very important, Michael. It puts that 25% tax right on the border. Now, just briefly, Harvard did a study on it. Back then it was the James Trafficant bill, and we left Social Security and Medicare out. I am now talking about bringing Medicare and Social Security in and graduating at 25%. Harvard said when you get rid of that tax code, which is so oppressive, that's chased companies out of America, they said that the prices will hardly rise from what they are now with that 25% tax. And let me tell you what, now, no capital gains tax, no tax on investment, no tax on savings, no debt tax. This is where we got to go, Michael. Everybody's talking about the symptoms. No one's dealing with the cancer. The cancer is that progressive communist income tax. Damn it, it's got to go. And second of all, there should be nobody but the American people that controls the American government. If it happens to be Israel through their lobby, then go ahead and call me what you want. Damn it, that's the way it is.
Well, Jim, you just pointed out something very, very interesting here, and I think we need to drive this fact home that the truth is that the entire time you were in Congress, you were talking about a lot of issues that no one else would touch. Everybody else was running to support NAFTA and GATT and free trade. Everybody was, pushing for all these programs. You were the only one who was out there saying loudly and proudly that we needed to protect our borders, that we needed to protect American jobs and industry, that we needed to look out for America first. And that, apparently, they consider a very dangerous thing. All right, well, I hear we are going to the break, folks. When we come back, more with Jim Traficant, and we do have some callers lined up, and I'll ask you to keep your questions brief and let Jim say what he has to say. Stay tuned, folks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We have Jim Traficant here with us tonight. Back in the 1930s and 1940s, the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives had a lot of people of great integrity, real towers of integrity, people who were not afraid to speak out. And as far as I'm concerned, during the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, there was only one member of Congress who could even stand next to any of those great people of the past, and that's Jim Traficant. Jim, I want to ask you a question. It's a personal question. You were back when you were in college. You were playing football up there at the University of Pittsburgh. Did you ever even have an inkling in your mind that you would ever be serving in the U.S. Congress, or that you would end up going to jail for just speaking your mind?
Well, certainly not. I was raised very, very poor neighborhood. In fact, we had a rough time. My dad was a truck driver, and things were tough when I was a kid. But we were a good family, and we survived. And through my athletic ability, a full scholarship, I was recruited all over the country. In fact, was all set to go to Notre Dame and end up firing the football coach Christmas Eve. And that was a shame. I really looked forward to that and really had my heart set on it when they fired that head coach, and he didn't take any of the new coach didn't take any of the kids that he had lined up. So, No, I never thought so, but I always felt one thing very passionately, that in America, you have free speech, and don't be afraid to use it. When you go into deliberate in a jury room or in a ballot box, let no one influence you, and don't be afraid to stand up for your country. One thing you said that is true, and believe me when I tell you this, I made some statements about Palestinian children were godchildren too, and that there was genocide that was happening over there. And everybody would just look down. No one would say a word because everybody was afraid, Michael. They didn't want to have an opponent with $2-3 million bankroll and all the mainstream news media calling you a Nazi. And I'll never forget when I undertaken the Demenya case, when the mainstream media says Trafficant supports Nazi mass murderer. I never said anything, but when I brought him home, and it was my investigation basically freed that man. You never heard my name again, because they were afraid to God I'd end up running for U.S. Senate or something. So the bottom line is they are afraid of the voice. It was a lone voice, but they were afraid of it, believe me.
And that was our very, very dear mutual friend, one of the finest human beings I've ever known, the late Jerome Brentar, who I think was the first person to bring the Demenya case to your attention.
Yes, he had called me a number of times, and then like I said in my column, the young John and Ed Nishnik came to the office, and my staff told him I wasn't in. And finally, I listened to his comments, and he basically said, "My God, I don't even have a parking ticket. No one even talked to me." I guess they went to every House and as member and every senator they possibly could, and no one would even let him in the door. Michael, what a tragedy! And when I had sat down with him, and this never hit the press, I said, "Look, if your dad's responsible for exterminating 1 million people," I says, "I sure as hell will pull the switch." I said, "But I think your congressmen and your senators should at least sit down and talk to you." And they said that they didn't come to me, and they came to me last, Michael, because they knew the government hated me. They needed somebody that the government liked. And the way it turned out, it worked out good. But look what he's going through now, Michael. Look at this. God forbid. What a tragedy we're faced with.
Yeah, I'm almost glad Jerry Brentar isn't here to see this. That's yeah.
Yeah, he's an unusual guy, and he put a lot of money into that process too. Believe me, he financed a lot of that struggle that went on over there. But when I went over there for that week to try and help them, I in fact paid my own way. And if it wasn't for that interview on Brian Gumbel, I'm not so sure that Israeli Supreme Court would have turned around as they did. And if you could by any chance get that tape, when I said, "Look, they put this man to death. Israel's going to lose $20-25 billion a year," and he said, "Well, they only get $3 billion, Congressman. $3 billion? I said, that's $5,000 for every man, woman, and child in Israel." I said, "But the truth is," I said, "Brian, I said that's just one of the 13 bills. I said there's loans converted to grants, economic assistance, military assistance." I said it's more like $20-25 billion a year. Let me tell you something. It didn't take long to get a phone call that says, "Take him home," because they knew the evidence I had was overwhelming. But, Michael, the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati wouldn't accept the evidence, number one. Number two, Congress wouldn't hold a hearing. "Jim, please don't bring that to me. It's too sensitive. It's too sensitive." And I said it then, and I say it now. When does sensitivity waive the Bill of Rights and the Constitution? I'm ashamed of our government, Michael. I'm ashamed of it. And I'll tell you something. I don't know what I'm going to do, but the FBI, the IRS, and the Justice Department is going to answer to me before it's over. I am that determined.
Well, I know there's a lot of people out there that are behind you like they were when you were in Congress, and that's one of the reasons why they had to get you out of there. And I'll tell you what, Jim, we have quite a few people lined up here that would like to say hello, including a couple from your home state of Ohio.
Well, go right ahead.
I'd like to go to the phones right now. We have Mike in Ohio. Mike, come aboard.
How you doing?
How you doing tonight, Mike?
Oh, I'm doing fairly well, and I'm glad to see Mr. Traficant finally he's been let out of prison. I've been following his case, because I'm just up in Lorain County. I know what goes on. We hear about that, and I sensed straight from the beginning that he was being set up. And with the John Demyanik, I knew about the Israelis, the Jewish, their influence on our representatives and congressmen, and when I started hearing Mr. Trafficant talking, I could tell he was telling us the truth, and I put two and two together, and that's why they want to get rid of him and give him a hard time. They want him to be quiet. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Mr. Trafficant, for your service to our republic and to the American people.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate your comments. And I'd like to also say this to you. I'm a capitalist, certainly not a socialist or communist. And I think we got to make a profit in this country, but we don't have to be sold out, and we don't have to be influenced by anybody but our own people. And I think once we straighten out some of the variables of our economic activity and we start putting our country first and being fair, I think we're going to do just fine. But I appreciate your comments because there are a lot of people. People are surprised the way I've been treated since I've come back.
I'd like to ask you one question, though. How can the Israeli lobby have so much influence on our elected representatives in Congress and the Senate?
I've been called an anti-Semite for a hell of a lot of things, but I'm going to just put the hay where the goats can reach it. Number one, they're very strong. They control much of the commerce of the country. They control most of the news media. They control Hollywood and New York. They're very powerful. Now, if you control the money, you control the commerce, you control the media, you control the political activity. And they will not admit it, but they basically do that. Now, some of these congressmen get an awful lot of money from the Israeli lobby. They say they can only get $10,000 a cycle. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of those little political activity committees that you'd never associate with the Israeli lobby is, in fact, money from Israel. And I'm prepared, and that's one investigation that I'm going to bring out in one of my columns with the American Free Press. This is what I'm saying. I want Michael Piper to listen to this, because this is something Michael should be looking at. Every political action committee, where they might be called real estate PACs or this type of PAC or Southern California PAC, there's all these different PACs, Michael, and a lot of them are nothing more than Israeli money being pumped into the Congress of the United States. And some of those guys are getting $250,000, $500,000 a cycle. And they're scared to death. Let no one kid you. If they don't do what they're expected to do, they'll have an opponent well-financed, and the media will turn on them in a heartbeat. And this is what is happening. I think somebody has to show the truth of who really is behind these lobbies. Now, when I talk about American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, that's one lobby. But what I'm also saying here now is there are PACs that look very innocent, but they're also Israeli lobbies. And I'm sure they're listening to this broadcast because they want to put Michael Piper right in prison. All they have to do is find any little excuse. I don't even have to have a hearing. They can come put cuffs on me and take me away for 3 more years. But I'll be damned if I'm going to sit here. When I have the microphone, I'm going to make a statement. Now, when I came out, I had five national TV shows in the first 35 days, but it all died out real fast when my politics came forth. They're afraid of giving a man like Jim Traficant the microphone. And I don't blame them. That's good business on their behalf because I will tell it like it is.
All right, Mike, appreciate your call.
Thank you,
Real
Mike.
Good question. Let's go to another caller from Ohio. Bill in Ohio.
What a pleasure. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
How you doing,
Good.
Bill?
Boy, you're one of my favorites, Congressman Traficant. I born and raised in Dayton. That's almost a ghost town now. GM and Delphi, of course, they got stiffed. I'm south of there, but I drive through there to see family occasionally, and it's been gutted like the rest of the Rust Belt in much of America. Oh, sure, I'm sorry. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to say, Congressman, you're not an anti-Semite. I think they are anti-Gentile. And what they're doing with the destruction of this country and our dollar is anti-human. They are enslaving us all, and at this time we should not be working to audit the Fed. We should be working to abolish the
Absolutely.
damn Fed and throw the bastards, the money changers, out of the temple. Drive
exactly
them
right.
out of the temple.
Bill, let me just say this. I am going to be the featured speaker at the Fed up in Cleveland this coming Sunday. And I was sort of hoping that maybe Michael Piper and the AFP might cover that and use that, because it's going to be a protest all around the country in major cities. And I've been selected here in the Cleveland area. I can't leave this district. And you see, I've come right out and said it. All this business of auditing the Fed, that's great, and I give everybody credit. At least it's something to do. But after the audit's over, it'll be business as usual, and politicians will beat their chests. There makes no sense. This Federal Reserve System is a private entity, a private corporation. Constitution is clear. Congress shall coin the money. Get rid of the damn thing and abolish it. Don't need an audit. Abolish that damn thing. And listen, until the Congress of the United States abolishes the IRS, repeals the 16th Amendment, and starts to put the money supply back in the hands of our people by abolishing the Federal Reserve System, America will continue to gradually decline to the point where I predict, Michael Collins Piper, on your show, an implosion similar to the old Soviet Union. And I predict the first state to go independent will be Alaska with its own revenue stream. And then you'll begin to see, over the issue of donor states and recipient states, a tremendous schism that's worse than the old Civil War when it broke out. One last thing. I'm the congressman that passed putting 10,000 troops on our border. We sure as hell don't need illegal immigrants consuming our health services. They should be thrown the hell out of here. And it's time that the people understand this, because we're talking about a national health care system now that's going to chase more jobs out. Without getting off the subject and going off on a tangent, I'm just going to say this, Michael, before I maybe forget this point. If that health policy is any good, why isn't the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives going to be a part of it? Why will they have an exclusive contract?
They're a bunch of damn hypocrites, Jim. You know it, and I know it. And these damn Satanists, they passed that damn law. We know it on a Christmas Eve in 1913, the 16th Amendment, when most of the Congress was away at home celebrating Christmas with their families. And I just want to say, end the Fed, deport the illegals, no more wars for Israel. God bless you and your work, and God keep you safe, Jim.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for your
Bill,
call.
thanks for your call. Well, we have about 3 minutes before our final break. We have a lady in Rhode Island named Harriet. We're going to bring Harriet aboard.
Yes, hi. Michael?
Hi, Harriet. How are you?
Hi, good. I want to congratulate you and Congressman Trafficant, and I want to say that I'm a 65-year-old person, and I'm a retired doctor, and I trust both of you very much, you see. And I want to be really grateful to both of you for what you are doing by exposing these people with such courage, because very, very few people do that. And I do this in my spare time also. And I have experienced their wrath and malice, because they have been stealing my letters, they have been intercepting my phone and blocking my emails, because I'm exposing their corruption at Brown University. What is going on in the universities is that these scientists are brainwashing minorities to hate white people, white Christians, you see. And I have seen this at Brown, and this is also occurring in other places. And they have now, most of the universities and colleges are run by scientists, you see, the presidents. And at Brown, we have got a black woman radical who is like Obama, the front woman, to carry out their one world agenda, you see, and I am aware of all that, you see. And I hope that both of you will be safe, and we have to tell the audience that we are not planning to commit suicide, and we are aware of what they have done to our President Kennedy, and Michael has written about it, and USS Liberty, and I know all that, you see, and I'm exposing them.
Well, Harriet, unfortunately your experience is just reflects what's happened to a lot of people in this country over the years. And as I said in my book about Jim Traficant's case, if they can do what they did to a well-known United States congressman, they can do it to any American citizen who dares to speak out. Jim, did you have a comment there before we go to break?
I wanted to salute Harriet, and I literally have pain to hear people who are like Harriet who see this, and it's like whispering in a forest, that everybody's even afraid to talk. They whisper about it. They're even afraid to even communicate about it. So you're a very brave woman, Harriet, and we're very proud of you, and we're honored you took time to call us.
Yeah, Harriet, we're going to the break, but I do appreciate your call. Folks, we have a couple other callers lined up here. When we come back from the break, we will bring up Steve from Illinois. In the meantime, folks, I do want to mention that if you'd like to send a little gift of appreciation to Jim Traficant's wife, Tish Traficant, I think that would be a nice thing to do, because she sat at home out there in Poland, Ohio for 7 years waiting for Jim to come back. And you can write her at Tish Traficant, 429 North Main Street, Poland, Ohio, 44514. Tish Traficant, 429 North Main Street, Poland, Ohio, 44514. We'll be right back after the break. Stay tuned. We'll bring up Steve from Illinois. All right, folks, we are wrapping up this hour very fast here. We're going to squeeze in one more caller before we bid Jim Traficant farewell for the evening. We have Steve in Illinois. Steve, fire away. Steve from Illinois. Steve, are you there? I'm afraid we lost Steve, but I'll tell you what, I'm just going to go ahead and let Jim wrap up the hour here. Jim, is there anything else you want to tell our listeners? Because I know people are anxious to hear what you have to say.
Well, Michael, one thing I'd like to recommend to you, because I don't think there's anybody any better, is get an entire listing of all the political action committees and list them in the American Free Press, and ask people who have any information about these PACs to write you.
That's a very good idea.
I think that's one thing to do, and I'm going to look into it, and I'm going to begin to look into it. But let me say this. I believe that our country is in grave danger. The dollar may actually collapse, and I don't see anybody doing anything about it, and everybody's just tinkering with the edges and putting bandages on. We are now, Michael, subsidizing home purchases, auto purchases, and we have a false sense of economic growth and activity through government debt instruments trying to produce a stimulus here. God almighty, can't you see what's happening? That national debt is now over $12 trillion. We're in trouble.
Jim, in one of the big newspapers today, whether it was the Times or the Post here in Washington, or I think it was one of the two Washington papers, they had a review of a book written by a gentleman who says that China is going to be the great power of the 21st century. And he says practically exactly what you're saying, that the American nation is about to implode, and that the American people are going to see a lot of suffering in the days ahead. And they're just going to have to like it or lump it.
Well, you know what's interesting, Michael? I said once on the House floor, is Russia's a fly on our face. China's an elephant eating our assets. And I wasn't just saying it to joke. Here's Russia, Soviet Union, a country that couldn't even stock toilet tissue in their grocery stores, and they were being called a superpower. But that big superpower, we're not the only superpower, and that big Chinese dragon is taking over, I would say, close to $500 billion a year in trade surplus out of this country. They say it's 250, 300. They're lying. China is taking close to $500 billion, and they're buying nuclear attack submarines, attack aircraft. They have missiles. And let me tell you, the only thing holding this economy up that we do have are those missiles. And those missiles aren't the only missiles around anymore. We're facing some serious problems. I predict the implosion unless the following is done. Abolish Internal Revenue Service, repeal the 16th Amendment, initiate a flat 25% national final retail sales tax, eliminate all the taxes on savings, investment, education, death taxes, capital gains. And that 25% tax on the border, every one of those Japanese and Germans come over to visit Las Vegas, pay into our tax scheme. Everybody who spends pays into our tax scheme. No one avoids the tax scheme. And when you take that powerful overhead that's forced on our companies by this tax code, the prices that we're familiar with now probably will not even be impacted upon by that 25%. And everybody gets a full paycheck. No more withholding, no more April 15th, no more government in our face.
I can't think that anyone could present a better program than what you've just presented, Jim. I want to thank you for being on the show, to say God bless you and your family for what you have gone through, just because you dared to speak out and say what needed to be said. Thank you, Jim Traficant, on behalf of all the listeners here at RBN and the readers of American Free Press. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you and all your listeners.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. Jim Traficant, the one and only.
With recent